Okay. Episode 27. Chapter 27. Epigraph. I would like to achieve the kind of radiance that can bring about non-violently what other people have to do violently. Simone Weil. He is leaning into the center of his cart, presumably to assess his groceries. His leg is extended behind him, presumably to maintain balance. It is a complete extension. The toe is pointed. He is a tall fellow. The cart is askance. The bulk of the cart and the length of him block the aisle. Completely. I stand there leaning on my cart, waiting. He doesn't seem to see me or doesn't care. I can only presume what he is up to, since it makes no sense to me. I could never take up that much space for that long. Because I am fat, the feeling of taking up space worries me. I'm hypervigilant in public, sucking in my stomach, tucking my butt, tilting my body to one side or the other, squeezing through crowds, careful not to brush against anyone. I may make too much of it, but I worry that people already think I'm taking up too much space. Oops, I looked away from the page and now I'm lost. I try to prove them wrong. I could never block the aisle in a grocery store without noticing the people around me. He can. Finally, he stands erect and slowly looks around for his next purchase. Down the next aisle, a woman is bending over a large, multicolored, straw-woven sack. The sack is almost half her size. Even in the bulky sweater and layered scarves she wears, it is clear that she is petite. She is bent at the waist, and because she is at the end of the aisle and between two tables piled with fruit, she is blocking the entrance into that aisle. I wait. I suppose I could say excuse me, but I feel like I can slow down and allow her to do whatever it is she's doing. It seems courteous. The problem is that people who I have this problem with never seem to return the courtesy. A few minutes later, this same woman will bump into me with her large multi-colored straw-woven sack. She will be looking the other way at the time. She will not notice the bump. I am really fat, but there are times when I seem to be invisible. People move past me, reach around me, knock into me, and do not seem to notice. In front of the espresso counter sits a man in a wheelchair. He is really fat. Hanging off the back of his wheelchair are 4 canvas bags in various states of fullness. All this adds up to quite a mass. On his shoulder sits a parrot, a large parrot, a mostly red parrot with large wings that are spreading and folding. He is talking to the parrot while he waits for his latte. He is blocking the entrance to the cafe, the aisle to the cookies, and the entrance to the bathroom. But I am not annoyed. Not at all. Why do some people bother me and others not? Can't say for sure. Thin white men bother me the most. Thin white women come in second. A guy in a wheelchair with a red parrot on his shoulder is just too extraordinary. I love him. Is my criteria discriminatory? Definitely. When I get on the bus, I notice 3 teenage boys sitting in the middle of the bus. The seats are facing one another across the aisle. I have to walk down the aisle to get to a seat. The boys are sprawled, legs wide apart, backpacks hanging off their shoulder into the seat next to them. One has a skateboard beneath his feet and he's rocking it back and forth. One of them is pitched forward, talking with rolling hands and arm gestures. As I pass between them, I feel the testosterone pulsing off their bodies. It's almost erotic. They don't back up a centimeter as I pass. I suck and tuck and tilt to get through the narrow space. They take up space. They fill up space. They own the area around them for miles. I am less than an annoyance. Why do I feel like an annoyance? When I sit in a seat on the bus, people rarely sit next to me. When they do, it is clear there is enough room, but we touch. I often wonder if they think I'm contagious, like maybe they'll gain 50 pounds if we remain touching for too long. How many sight gags are done in which someone has to sit next to a fat person? I live in a culture that holds fatness as a metaphor for weakness and lack of control. My method of acceptance was to ignore my size, to live as if it didn't matter. But it always felt like it did. My body will always be larger. It begins with genetics, also bone structure. How much larger is only somewhat controllable. When I weigh the effort and obsession of controlling how much larger against the value of physical self-acceptance, acceptance wins. That doesn't mean I don't exercise or try to eat in a healthy way. After years in the restaurant industry, I'm quite a food snob. I eschew junk food. My diet is organized around an intention to eat locally, organically raised food, well prepared and beautifully presented. I do yoga and swim. I don't think about losing weight. I think about eating healthy, beautiful food and enjoying my body. I read about size acceptance when I read about all the other social movements of the 60s. I knew there was an organization called NAFA, National Association to Advance Fat Acceptance. NAFA is a 30-year-old organization that began as a social group, formed by a man who had grown tired of people telling him that although his wife was intelligent, funny, kind, and had a pretty face, she ought to lose weight. He didn't want her to lose weight. I sent them money once. They sent me a nice resource book. I knew they had dances for people who preferred fat partners to hook up. I was in my late 40s when I went to my first NAFA weekend convention and dinner dance. I walked through rooms filled with folks selling clothing, jewelry, books, porcelain fat angels, fat mermaids, and fat ballerinas. As I sat in on a discussion group about the choice to have stomach reduction surgery. Sat in on a discussion about the choice to have stomach reduction surgery. The people who had chosen or were choosing to have the surgery were allowed to dominate the conversation lest we appear unsupportive. It seemed to me that it was likely they could find support in any other room in town. In a NAFA convention, they should expect some disapproval. They'd done the diets, had the surgery, and many of them were still fat. Weight Watchers and Jenny Craig will tell you their success stories, but they don't count the people who regain the weight after a period of time. At NAFA, you hear litanies of failed attempts to lose weight. And the people with the litanies want love and support that they can't find anywhere else. It's also true that many of them are still trying to lose weight. Later at the dance, I watched while a woman in a gold lame backless jumpsuit danced vigorously, occasionally humping her ass into the air in a randy feline manner. Two women in hot pink, sleeveless sequin, one-piece miniskirt dresses seemed to be the most sought-after dance partners. Notably absent was a disco ball. But we were in a multi-use room in the Westin St. Francis Hotel near the airport. Earlier, there had been a buffet table in the middle of what was now the dance floor, and we all ate at linen-covered tables that circled the periphery. It was a typical convention environment, except that few people in the room weighed less than 250 pounds. Sitting there, it seemed to me that when you give a group of people who have been sexually carnivalized or neutered permission to be sexual, things get real Fellini real fast. We were in a set-apart place, a place where the fatter the better was the standard. But it didn't feel like there were many people who had internalized acceptance or even delight in their bodies. And I'm not actually any more interested in meeting a man who might want me because I'm fat than I am in meeting a man who might reject me for being fat. I cling, despite much evidence to the contrary, to the romantic notion that I might meet someone who would love me and my body because it's all me. The men were called FAs, fat admirers. They were dressed in bad polyester and they circled the table doing a bad version of Saturday Night Live player. And there weren't that many of them. The fat community is as fractious as any other affinity coalition. The Fat Feminist Caucus was asked by NAFA to tone down their politics. A body painting seminar was canceled in fear that the hotel might not like fat people displaying too much of their painted bodies. We did dominate in the pool area. Fat women in bikinis rollicked unabashed. They were all pretty cute, but somehow it didn't make me feel any better about the world. After all, it wasn't the world. I wanted to talk revolution, unleashing the untapped power of people who were shunted to the corners of the great American schoolyard could be seditious. If all these people actually moved out of the corners of the schoolyard, out of the multi-use room, and into mainstream culture demanding representation and participation, a billion-dollar diet industry might collapse. And maybe then we might be able to think about our bodies in truly magical ways. That's what I tried to do. I tried to think about my body in magical ways. I tried to focus on developing my inner self. There are ways in which I held back and waited for the world to come and tell me that I was such a cool person that it didn't matter that I was fat. It was certainly true about the men that I loved. I did not want it to matter. I wanted it not to matter, but it always felt like it did. And in a way it should. It should matter that my body is a natural expression of diversity. Beauty is a shapeshifter. It's in the eye of the beholder. It's also in the heart. I want people to question the way they see fat bodies. It shouldn't require magic. One year, I flew to North Carolina to help my mother care for Ken while he recovered from back surgery. She used some frequent flyer miles to get me a first-class seat. She was hoping it would be more comfortable for me. When I fly, I make great efforts to fly on days when most people might not be flying. I usually ask for an aisle seat with a movable armrest, then I can hang into the aisle. I get bashed by everyone who passes and bashed by the cart that the stewardesses move up and down the aisle, but I don't press on anyone. I pull my arms tight around me. By the time I get off the plane, I am bruised and aching. First class wasn't much better. The seats were bigger, but made of rigid plastic and still tight. I couldn't eat the fancy dinner because I couldn't put the tray up. I couldn't watch the movie because I couldn't put the earphones into the place where it plugged in, which was in the side of the armrest covered by my hip. The fellow next to me ate a steak, watched a film, ate a chocolate sundae, worked on his laptop. The flight was packed, and while we were boarding, they had repeatedly reminded us there was only room for each of us to have 2 pieces of carry-on luggage. When I got on, there wasn't any room in the overhead for my bag. I had to go 2 seats back to find a room. As we were deboarding, my stepmate pulled out a suitcase, a briefcase, a laptop case, and a coat. He had taken up roughly 3 times as much the space he was allotted for luggage. He was a skinny white guy. I was sitting in the airport in Honolulu once. 4 people walked through a door leading from a ramp to an airplane. I don't know if they were Hawaiian or Samoan or something that I didn't know about. They were tall and fat and dressed in brightly colored clothing and patterned fabric. They wore thick flower leis around their neck. There were 3 women and a man. They all had massive amounts of long black hair with crowns of more flowers. They were huge. They were overwhelming. It was impossible not to stare, and they didn't seem to mind. They moved through the space with a profound dignity. They took up space. I loved them. I wanted to follow them. I wanted to live with them. I wanted to be just like them.